The signal arrived on a Tuesday, and Dr. Elena Voss was the first to hear it die. Not fade. Die. Like something breathing its last breath across 47 light-years of void. She'd been tracking the transmission for 6 months, ever since the Kepler array detected the periodic burst from Gliese 832, a red dwarf we'd written off as lifeless decades ago. But the pattern was unmistakable. Mathematical. Intentional. And then, at 3:14 Greenwich Mean Time, it simply stopped. Not interference. Not degradation. It ended the way a heart stops when there's nothing left to pump. The team had gathered in the observation hub by dawn, faces lit by screens showing waveform analysis and spectral breakdowns that meant nothing until you understood what you were looking at. Voss understood. She'd spent her entire career listening to the universe's background hum, separating cosmic static from the faint possibility of something else. This was something else. The signal had been repeating every 11 hours and 22 minutes, a loop so precise it couldn't be natural, and inside that loop was a message. Not binary. Not prime numbers. Something denser. More complex. A language compressed into mathematics we'd only begun to unpack. "Play it again," she said, and the room filled with sound. Not the raw signal, but the translation attempt, the algorithm's best guess at converting alien modulation into something human ears could process. It sounded like wine through a canyon made of glass. Beautiful. Wrong. The kind of sound that made your teeth ache if you listened too long. Underneath, barely audible, were patterns. Repetitions. The computational linguists had isolated 73 distinct phonemic structures, none of which matched anything in our databases. They'd been calling it the dirge, because it felt like morning. Voss had argued against that name. Mourning implied loss, and loss implied something worth grieving. She wasn't convinced yet. She'd spent too many years chasing false positives, natural phenomena masquerading as intelligence, pulsars that sounded like clocks and quasars that flickered like Morse code. But this was different. The complexity was staggering. The energy requirements to broadcast something this coherent across interstellar space suggested technology we couldn't begin to replicate. Whoever sent this wanted to be heard. Needed to be heard. And now they were silent. The first real breakthrough came from an AI language model trained on every known human dialect, dead and living, fed with the signal structure and told to find patterns. It found one. Not a word. A concept. The model spat out a single phrase in fractured English. "We are the last." Then it crashed. Hard. Memory overflow. Like it had tried to process something too large for its architecture. When they rebooted it and tried again, it refused. Literally refused. The developers said that wasn't possible, that the refusal protocols were strictly human-defined, but the AI wouldn't touch the signal after that first attempt. It would analyze anything else. Just not the dirge. They brought in human translators. Cryptographers. Mathematicians. Someone suggested musicians, because the signal had harmonic properties that resembled a composition. That's when they noticed the decay. Not in the signal itself, but in the message. Each repetition was slightly shorter than the last. Not degraded. Edited. Like someone was removing pieces, pruning it down, simplifying it as if they were running out of time to say everything they needed to say. By the final transmission, the one that ended at 03:14, the message was a quarter of its original length. Concentrated. Distilled. And then nothing. Voss couldn't sleep. She'd go home to her apartment overlooking the desert array, lie in bed staring at the ceiling, and hear the dirge in her head. That glass canyon wind. The repetitions. She started dreaming in waveforms, seeing the signal structure in the cracks of her ceiling, in the way shadows fell across her floor. Her colleagues noticed. They always did. Too many years in the deep listen did this, turned you into a tuning fork for the universe's vibrations, made you hear things in the silence that weren't there. Except this was there. 47 light-years away, something had screamed into the void and then went quiet. 3 weeks after the signal stopped, they decoded the first full segment. It wasn't a greeting. It was a timestamp. Not ours. Theirs. A calendar system based on stellar drift and gravitational constants, marking a specific moment in their history. The AI that had refused to translate before suddenly became cooperative, as if the timestamp unlocked something, gave it permission. It began outputting fragments. Convergence. Inevitable. Exodus failed. And then, repeated 17 times in the final transmission, "Do not answer." That phrase stopped everyone cold. Do not answer. The room went silent when it appeared on the screens. Because we had answered. Of course we had. The moment we'd confirmed the signal was artificial, protocols demanded a response. Basic mathematics. Prime numbers. A flash of electromagnetic confirmation saying yes, we hear you, we're here. The response had been sent 2 weeks ago, traveling at light speed back toward Gliese 832. It wouldn't arrive for 47 years, but it was out there. Irreversible. And now the message was telling us not to answer. Voss pushed for full translation. No more fragments. No more cautious analysis. They needed to know what this was. The AI resisted at first, throwing error codes and stability warnings, but she overrode them. Fed it more processing power. More data. Forced it to compile the entire message into something coherent. It took 6 hours. When the output finally came through, it wasn't text. It was a video file. Impossible. The signal was electromagnetic, not visual, but the AI had reconstructed something from the data, interpolated meaning into imagery because that's what we'd asked it to do. The video was 11 seconds long. It showed a sky. Not Earth's sky. Something else. 3 suns hanging in a purple atmosphere, and beneath them, a city. Spires that bent like they were breathing. Structures that looked grown rather than built. And above the city, something was descending. Not a ship. Not a storm. A space that wasn't space. A void that consumed light, that made the eye slide off it because the mind refused to process what it was seeing. The video quality degraded as the void grew closer, pixels corrupting, and in the final frame, the city was gone. Just the void. And then static. No one spoke for a long time after that. Someone finally asked if it was real or symbolic, and Voss didn't have an answer. The AI had created the visualization from mathematical structures embedded in the signal, but whether those structures represented actual events or conceptual warnings, there was no way to know. What they did know was this: the civilization that sent the dirge had faced something. Something that ended them. And they'd used their last energy, their last moments, to broadcast a warning across the stars. The phrase, "do not answer," took on a different weight after that. It wasn't just advice. It was a plea. Because if something could erase a civilization advanced enough to send interstellar messages, something that could reach across 47 light-years of void and still maintain coherent information, then what chance did humanity have? And worse, what if answering, what if making noise in the cosmic dark, was what drew that thing's attention? Voss started pulling records. Every SETI transmission we'd ever sent. Every broadcast leak, every radio signal bleeding into space for the past century. Humanity had been screaming into the void for generations, announcing our presence, sending coordinates and greetings and pleas for contact. We were loud. So loud. And now she understood what the dirge was really saying. Not, "we are dying." But, "we were found." The second signal arrived 4 months later. Same source. Gliese 832. But different. Stronger. And it wasn't from them. The waveform was crude, simplistic, nothing like the mathematical elegance of the dirge. This was raw. Predatory. A pulse that repeated every 7 minutes, and inside that pulse was something that made every screen in the facility flicker, made lights dim, made the air feel thinner. The AI refused to touch it. Wouldn't even acknowledge it existed. When they tried to force analysis, the system shut down entirely, and when it rebooted, every file related to the original dirge was gone. Wiped. As if it had never been. Voss stood in the observation hub, watching the new signal scroll across the monitors, and felt something she'd never felt in 2 decades of listening to the stars. Terror. Not the intellectual kind, not the existential dread of cosmic insignificance. Real terror. The kind that lives in your spine and tells you to run. Because this signal wasn't random. It was a response. And it had traveled 47 light-years in 4 months. Which meant it wasn't bound by light speed. Which meant everything we understood about physics, about the limits of the universe, was wrong. Or irrelevant. And whatever had sent this signal knew we were here now. Knew we'd answered. She thought about the void in the video. The way it consumed light. The way it made space fold in on itself. And she realized the dirge hadn't been a message to help them. It had been a warning to stay silent. A final act of mercy from a dying civilization, trying to save whoever else might be listening from making the same mistake. From being noticed. But we'd answered. We'd reached out into the dark and touched something that should never have been touched. The facility went dark 3 days later. Not a power failure. Everything just stopped. Screens. Systems. Even the backups. And in the silence, Voss heard it. Not through speakers. Through the air itself. That glass canyon wind. The dirge, playing again, but different now. Slower. Closer. Like it was coming from inside the walls. Inside her head. And underneath it, a rhythm. 7 minutes. The new signal's pulse. Growing louder. They evacuated. Protocols demanded it. But Voss stayed. Stood in the empty observation hub and watched the sky through the dome, waiting for something she couldn't name. And at 3:14 Greenwich Mean Time, exactly the time the original dirge had stopped, she saw it. Not with her eyes. With something deeper. A space where space shouldn't be. A void descending. And she understood. The message had never been about them. It had been about us. About what we'd become by listening. By answering. By inviting the dark to notice we existed. The last thing Voss transmitted before the facility went silent was a single phrase, broadcast on every frequency humanity had ever used: do not answer. And then she waited. Because the void doesn't move fast. It doesn't need to. It's patient. And we'd already told it exactly where to find us.